agenda is request for bill introductions. Seeing none, I do want to take this time to welcome our newest member for today, anyway, Senator Corson, and thank you for being here today on Friday. So we do have a hearing today on Senate Bill 307, which is requiring advanced voting ballots to be returned to the county election office by the day of the election. So the first thing we'll do is have Jason, could you give us a briefing, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members committee, Senate Bill 307 would amend 25-1132. This is a statute that establishes a deadline for submitting advanced voting ballots to the county election office. Under current law, as you probably are now aware, that deadline is the last delivery by the U.S. Postal Service on the third day following the day of the election. There's also authority granted to the Secretary of State to extend that time if necessary. Senate Bill 307 would amend those provisions to require that all advanced voting ballots be received by the county election office by the close of polls on election day, which is 7 p.m. And it would also strike the authority of the secretary to extend that deadline. And further, there is added language after that in 307 to prohibit any elected or appointed official or any court from changing that statutory deadline. The bill would go into effect on July 1st if enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. And we have a question. Senator Ware.
Yeah, yesterday, I believe I was told that something a little contrary from what I think I'm reading now. It says that language prohibiting any elected or appointed official from changing the statutory deadline. And I was concerned then that this would be a permanent thing. And I was told, oh, no. The legislature can always come back and change that later, but that's not what this seems to say. Can you help me?
Yes, the legislature always has a constitutional prerogative to come back and change law at any later date. No legislature can bind any future legislature through legislation. This reference is to elected or appointed officials outside of the legislature such as the Secretary of State, that would have authority to change that deadline.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. Our first proponent is Representative Charlotte Esau. And Charlotte, welcome to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Alley, Vice Chairman Hildebrand, Ranking Foscato, members of the committee. I appreciate you taking the time to look at this bill, and I'm testifying in support of 2319 and SB 307. The testimony goes for both of them. And I was there watching and observing, somewhat involved as an outsider, 4 years ago when the legislature looked at allowing ballots to come in after Election Day by mail. And I know they had good intentions. They thought there would be barcodes. They thought there'd be postmarks, some way to know for sure that the ballot was mailed before the end of the election on Election Day. And we found out afterwards that's not always the case. Sometimes there's no markings. And this year, folks have not had a lot of faith in the post office to deliver things in a timely manner. We know that's happened, and we have people that are concerned that they see the results of the election and they see them changing after the polls have closed, and we're undermining their faith in the election results. So that was why I drafted the bill that I did. After it was introduced, I had quite a few people tell me they were concerned that there might be misunderstandings about, now when can I mail my ballot, et cetera, and have it arrive on time. And they thought we should have put the deadline to be on Election Day, which I have no problem with, which is why I'm in support of the Senate bill version as well. And I don't want to undermine people's ability to get their ballots in, but at the same time, we now know we can have drop boxes that are open 24/7 if that's the way a county wants to do it. There are many ways to ensure that your ballot gets back in time. I do know that some folks have been concerned that if you are disabled, that you have trouble getting your ballot back. The folks that are seriously disabled are able to be on a permanent advance ballot list, and so they can get their ballot mailed 3 weeks ahead of time, which should give them plenty of time to return it, even via the postal system, if that's what they choose to do. So that's basically where I'm at on this one. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. It's appropriate now. We'll ask for questions. Are there any questions of Charlotte? Excuse me, Representative Esau. Yes, Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you just you touched on it a little bit, but can you just talk about why we need this bill and the problem that it's going to solve, sort of just why this legislation is necessary and the problem that it's attempting to fix?
I think the problem, it was somewhat on a national scale. I don't believe we've got serious problems within Kansas. We do have good election laws. I just think we should tighten them up a little bit. People were concerned that how do we really know those ballots were mailed before the close of the polls? And we start updating each day on what the results are. So they see changes. Sometimes they even flip whether somebody has won or lost. That wasn't the case in my case. I actually gained votes each time, but that wasn't the case for everybody. There were a couple of races where it flipped as ballots came in and they saw the differences. And we had folks that were just really concerned about it. Could they trust the results of the election? And I don't want anybody to have any doubt in that.
And to the point about the disabled folks and when ballots are going to be able to be mailed, this is, I guess, questions for my clarification, but I think there was an amendment made in this committee yesterday that would cut that time from 20 days to 15, and would that apply to disabled voters as well? And again, I apologize, maybe you're not the proper, maybe that's more of a revisor question, but I was listening to the meeting yesterday. There was an amendment made that would have shortened the period from which counties can start mailing ballots from 20 days to 15 days. And I'm wondering maybe if the revisor can let us know if that would also apply to disabled voters who are on the permanent advance ballot list, if that's appropriate, or?
We'll check. Jason, could you give us a briefing on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in action in this committee yesterday that there was legislation and an amendment adopted to change that from 20 days to 15 days prior to the election, and that would apply to all advance voting ballots, is my understanding. The Secretary of State's office can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Representative Esau, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your testimony. Oh, excuse me again. I looked and I did not see that hand go up.
She's doing ballet.
Senator Ware.
Thank you so much. I knew you didn't see me. That's why I started. I do have, well, and perhaps again, this is a question for both you and Jason. You were saying that the ballot drop boxes would help mitigate, you know, the squeeze on voters' rights to vote and all. But this bill doesn't seem to, it says, I believe if I'm reading this right, that the ballots have to be at the election officers, each county elections officer's place. Doesn't allow for a drop box. It doesn't seem like.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the good senator from Sedgwick, Senator Ware's question, that is existing law. This bill isn't changing that. That's existing law, and that's how the drop boxes were function this last election under this same law. So that doesn't change anything.
Oh, okay, so it doesn't change that. So they could drop it at the drop box too, as long as it was before 7 o'clock.
That was one of the questions I had discussed with the Secretary of State at the very beginning, was a drop box, a election official. Did we need to refine that? And they were happy with the language, so.
Okay, thank you.
I would also point out, Mr. Chair, if that's all right, that you can also return your ballot to any polling place on Election Day or to any advanced polling location. That was also changed about 4 years ago so that folks could walk in with their paper ballot already filled out, just drop it in. They go into a special bag that says this one was one that was mailed out and gets counted later when they do all the counting of all the, it's not really provisional because it was a perfect ballot if it came back just right.
I'm going to check one more time. Yes, Senator Ware.
And that was cleared as well? That's,
Senator Hildebrand.
I apologize, I didn't catch what she was asking, what was cleared. About the, being able to drop a advanced ballot into an advanced,
at the polling place.
yeah,
That
that's
is also not
current.
specified here.
That's current law now anyway. That deals with a different chapter in our statutes.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today. Our next proponent is Eric Rucker, who's former Assistant Secretary of State and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Elections and Legislative Matters. Welcome, Eric.
Members of the committee, thank you. Election Day should be the date that voting concludes. Election Day should serve as the date that the casting of ballots ends and that the finalizing of election results begins. SB 307 works to achieve these ends. Many states have created voting laws that allow voting in advance of Election Day. The origin of this idea spun out of the conviction that sick and physically disabled voters, as well as those citizens who were absent from their place of voting on Election Day, should not be disenfranchised. You and I may advance vote at least a week before Election Day in set physical locations, and several weeks ahead of time if by advanced mail. As a result, advance voting has served to increase the accessibility and the ease by which a vote may be cast. It has also become popular among elections officials because advance voting occurring in advance of Election Day can bypass otherwise congested voting places. In short, advance voting has become so popular that in some areas of Kansas and across the United States, more votes are cast before Election Day, in advance of Election Day, than on Election Day. However, several years ago, our laws began to allow advanced mail ballots to be received after Election Day. This practice turns advanced balloting on its head, as these ballots can now be received, cast, and counted after Election Day. It should be it should be obvious that these ballots cannot be considered advanced. No one method of casting a ballot should receive favorable treatment. Votes cast at the polls, votes cast in advance at physical locations, and votes cast in advance by mail should all be received by Election Day. Any deviation from one set time of receipt favors one method of voting over another. Our current practice, allowing voting to be accomplished in advance of elections, continues to allow those with special circumstances and special limitations to participate in our elections. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was, I don't believe that current law, not Senate Bill 307, but current law would allow votes to be cast after Election Day, which is what your testimony was. Can you help explain that to me? Because I think I'm a little confused, because that would, to me, be a violation of current law.
It would be, but that's happening.
And that's, you have evidence that that's happening, that's...
Anytime that the possibility exists under current law that an individual could vote after the polls closed on Election Day, that's casting. Put their vote in the mail, that's mail receipt after Election Day, up to 3 days after Election Day. that could happen. You've heard the previous testimony as to how it is that that could happen. The lack of standardized postmarking, the lack of barcodes determining when in fact a piece of mail actually hit the mail system would allow that to occur. In other words, if you allow receipt of an advanced mail ballot up to 3 days after the election, it could be cast after Election Day or on Election Day after the polls closed. It could then be received and it could be counted.
So it could be, but again, you have no evidence that in Kansas that is happening. You have nothing to present to the committee that that's happened or is happening, just that it could hypothetically happen.
And your question also included, our current law would allow such a thing. Our current law would allow such a thing.
Thank you. Any further questions? I do have a question. It was stated previously, and maybe if you can't confirm, we could get the Secretary of State to confirm. Do all counties have the drop boxes for deposit of advanced ballots?
Yep. These old elections officials like myself do defer to the new elections officials.
Thank you. Katie, could you give us that answer, please?
I literally just pulled it, so whew. Katie Copal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Communications and Policy. Some counties prior to the election already utilized drop boxes. The data I have is the new drop boxes that were purchased using some of the CARES Act funding that was purchased by our office in late August after the primary election. In total, we ordered 180. 12 counties opted out. 12 requested just one drop box, 79 requested 2. We had allocated enough budget for every county to be supplied with 2, and because some of them opted out, we were able to grant the request of Wabunsee County for 3, Johnson County for 12. I will note there were some counties like Sedgwick County who prior to the election had purchased drop boxes.
Okay, thank you very much. Then Katie got one more question, maybe. So we've all heard, and I want to say that in my opinion, and I'm going to use my opinion here, but what we're trying to do with the debate and the actions yesterday and what we're trying to do here, I think, is to ensure that we have secure and safe elections. And so we're not trying to suppress any vote. But my question is, the last day that ballots could be received in election. We've always heard that some guy found a box of ballots over here in the janitor's closet. If they did find that ballot boxes full, would they be counted?
If you would, Mr. Chair, I'm going to defer to our election law expert, Clay Barker. He's more aware of that, and I do not want to be wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Clay, welcome to the committee again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, Deputy General Counsel, Secretary of State. It would depend somewhat on the facts and circumstances of the case, but if it appeared that it was an administrative error on the part of the government official, the ballots would be counted because the voter had got them in, voted on time. But again, I'd have to know a little more about the details of your.
I don't have details. We have heard it happening. We don't know if it happened in Kansas. My question was, how long are we talking about? I mean, when are you going to declare the election is the election that's over? I mean,
the votes have to be cast by Election Day, and mail right now, as long as it's cast on or before Election Day and it arrives within 3 days, it'll be counted, and there's a hard cutoff. And the absolute hard cutoff is canvass. At some point, you have to have an official ending to the election, get your official result, and move on.
so in Kansas, that's 3 days.
For the mail ballots, nothing can be counted, even if it's postmarked early. And we do get mail ballots sometimes a month later, like late Christmas cards. But when I say we, the counties, but they are not counted.
They're not counted. Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Cluse.
So am I understanding this right? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 3 days will still be an act, or are we saying it's going to be the day, everything?
Senator, the way I read this bill, and again, our office has we're neutral on this. We have no position. You're the policymakers and decide when the ballots come in. The way I read the bill is that the mail ballot must be received on election day. It cannot be received after that. So the ballot could be dropped off at the polling place, a person could vote at the polling place, or the mail ballot arrives either in the mail or hand delivery at the county election office by, I believe the bill says 7 p.m., which is when polls close.
And one more question. So this would this include our military then as well?
The military ballots are governed by federal law, UNICABA, and they have some exceptions. And Ryan, is there an exception for anything coming late? Okay, nothing coming late. Those ballots, they'll get mailed out 45 days early. That's a federal requirement.
Okay, thank you.
And they can come back in somewhat different ways. If a soldier wants to voluntarily give up some ballot security, it can come back in different ways than regular ballots.
Any further questions? Thank you. Appreciate that information. That is all the proponents. We do have a neutral. Katie, do you want to testify as neutral? You're available for comments, so we appreciate you being here. Thank you. Opponents, we have Mr. Davis Hamlet, Loud Light Civic Action. You're in remote. Davis?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We can. Proceed.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Alley and members of the committee. The first thing I want to hit on really quick is just responding to some of what the proponents just said. It's important to note that, as you can see in the current law and what will still exist in this law in Senate Bill 307, is ballots can only be counted after Election Day late arrivals if they were postmarked by or before the close of polls on Election Day. And that's important. If it is missing a postmark, it cannot be counted. If it is postmarked late, it cannot be counted. So it is just factually incorrect to say that ballots can be cast after the close of polls. This covers mail ballots that would come in later for a variety of reasons. As the Secretary of State testified on a similar bill in the House, we know that it can take up to 7 days for the ballots to go either direction, to reach the voter or to come back to the election office. So first off, I just want to say, given that there's no justification for this bill. I don't know what the intentions of this bill are, but I do know the impact will undoubtedly be voter suppression. The main part of this bill is reducing the amount of time from 3 days to 0 days. This is actually more extreme than the bill that was proposed in the House, which gave at least 1 day extra for late ballots to come in, or late ballots is maybe inaccurate, for ballots that are delayed in the mail process to come in. And given all the context that we know around how slow mail has been, this is, again, a verifiable fact. The Postal Service has testified to the U.S. Congress about this, how mail is unusually slow right now. We know it's disproportionately impacting rural communities. And as was stated yesterday, there is not a single USPS mail distribution center in the state of Kansas. So mail has to leave the state of Kansas in the process of getting between the voter and the election office in either direction. On February 16th, the House Elections Committee heard HB 2319, which was a similar bill. With that, the Kansas Secretary of State testified at that hearing that during the 2020 general election, 17,224 ballots arrived on Wednesday, 10,790 ballots arrived on Thursday, and 4,353 ballots arrived on Friday, meaning had this bill been enacted, Senate Bill 307 would have thrown away the duly cast votes of 32,367 Kansas citizens in 2020. That is over 32,000 Kansans that would have been disenfranchised, not because they did anything wrong. Again, they had their ballot in the mail potentially several days, even before the election, but they're guilty of having slow mail that is provided by the government. In this way, Senate Bill 307 is simply the government punishing citizens for shortcomings of the government. It's just, again, undeniable that this bill would disenfranchise thousands of Kansans. Two other concerns I do want to highlight is that it removes the Secretary of State's discretion to extend the time for mail ballots to come in time of crisis. We can obviously think of unique circumstances where a tornado took out a road or something like that, and mail might need an extra day or two to handle that. And again, these ballots would have to be properly postmarked and verifiably received by be cast by the voter before the end of election day to be counted. I think that taking away that discretion is dangerous. And then additionally, this would attempt to say that courts cannot extend that deadline for any reason. That appears to be unconstitutional encroachment on the separation, on a separate branch of government. This is laid out in the US Constitution and the Kansas Constitution. The courts have the right to intervene if this would unconstitutionally suppress voters. And the last thing I do want to mention about this is that I know that there's a short deadline. I know that a lot happened, but essentially, you know, I had 0 business minutes to prepare testimony on this. I was notified at 6 p.m. I'd have testimony in by 9 a.m. There were a lot of people that testified on a similar bill in the House who I'm sure would be here today had they been given more time. But what I want to highlight, because I'm not sure if they'll be speaking today, is that the Kansas County Clerks and Elections Officials Association opposed this measure in the House a month ago. And I think that's really important because this means the 105 government offices that actually have to administer these elections oppose this policy, saying that they support maintaining the status quo with regards to election and canvassing, and that they believe the current deadline for receipt of valid advance ballots by mail should remain. So again, I think that given all of this, there is no justification from this. We have plenty of security measures in place. And we also have measures if anything wrong happens that they would be able to investigate and address them. So with the absence of any real reason to pass this law, and with 32,367 reasons not to, I'd recommend the committee oppose this bill, and I'm happy to stand for questions when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ware, questions?
Yes, thank you so much. Davis, did I hear you say that if a ballot came in without a postmark so that it could be verified when it was sent, would not be accepted?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, if you have Senate Bill 307 in front of it, you can see how already in 25-1132, it's line 17 through 19 on the bill in front of you. It says that all postmarked or that are postmarked or otherwise indicated by the U.S. Postal Service to have been mailed or on or before the close of the polls on the day of the election. So yes, the county clerks also in the last hearing in the House, they testified that they do have situations where a ballot doesn't have a postmark. They believe it was cast in time, but they can't count that. They can only count things that have postmarks on or before Election Day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hammett, can you talk about, I mean, one of the things that the proponents brought up was, we need to have certainty, and it is, I guess, arguably confusing to folks when they see an initial report and then that changes later. But can you just talk about how, whether or not we do anything to change 307, we're going to still have the canvassing process. We're going to still have elections that votes are still going to be coming in past 7 p.m. Not coming in, but votes are still going to be, that there is still the canvassing process. There is not a certainty on 7 p.m. on Tuesday whether or not we pass this. Can you just walk the committee through the canvassing process and how that is still going to arguably affect the results of some close races? And so there's still going to be public confusion. And I think really the answer is we just need to do a better job of educating voters about this process. So thank you.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you,
May I respond to that?
Yes, you may.
Sorry.
And then Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the question. So with that, we actually have the canvass can take place anywhere between, I believe it's like 6 to 15 days afterwards. And that's when provisional ballots will be addressed. So until about 2 weeks after the election, we don't actually know the results of the election. It's really important to recognize that election night results are, not real results. This is just done as a public service for curious people. And when we say that someone won on election night, what we're really saying is that someone won by such a big margin, it would just be impossible for it to change. But thousands and thousands, like tens of thousands of votes are still caught up in the provisional process, and it will be determined later if they can count. So we don't actually know the winner till at least 2 weeks later on a county level. And then there's an entire election objection process where if there's some anomaly that in the election process, that objection can be brought before the State Board of Elections. Lawsuits can be involved, and really it's not until about a month after the election that the real certified state result that cannot be changed has been enacted. And whenever we talk about, as it was mentioned, the elections aren't like overturned when more votes come in, right? It's just that they're still processing ballots. Some counties haven't even finished processing just the people who even voted in person on election day until days later. So yes, it is a kind of lengthy process with several steps. Some of those steps are mandated by federal law, so y'all wouldn't be able to change them even if you wanted to. I agree, though, that is a public education problem about understanding how elections really work. So thank you.
Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Davis, thank you for your testimony. Just circling back to something you said earlier, and I just want to make sure and get it clarified. You said all 105 counties oppose that bill in the House? Could you clarify that statement for me, please?
Yes, Senator Hildebrand, thank you. I said that in HB 2319, which was heard on February 16th, the Kansas County Clerks and Elections Officials Association, which is the official association representing the election policy stance of the 105 county election officials, as their organization stated that they are in opposition to this.
Senator Hildebrand.
Okay, Davis, thank you. And I apologize. I've slept a few days since then, but didn't he get up and speak and say he does not represent the 105 counties? He is speaking as an individual, even though he is the representative of 105 counties, but that he was not representing those 105 counties. He was just representing himself.
I'm not sure if that was on this bill or maybe a comment he made in response to something someone asked, but the official written document, the testimony, which I'd be happy to send to everyone, and you can also find on the website, their official written testimony is as the Kansas County Clerks and Elections Official Association in opposition to this. He may have been asked a question and said he can't respond to that question as the association.
Senator Hildebrand.
Davis, thank you for that clarification. But not so long ago, I was a county commissioner, and Kansas Association of Counties up here represents 105 counties. There wasn't one single time that they came and testified before the legislature that they reached out to our county and asked what our position was. They just automatically take that position on themselves. So I think it's very important that the committee understands that although someone that represents 105 counties doesn't actually speak for all those 105 counties. So thank you.
Are there any further questions? I do have one. The question that I have is, right now, present law is 20 days for advanced ballots. Is that correct?
It is mail ballots at the earliest can be sent out 20 days before the election. At the earliest is current law. And so that's, well, for most voters. For military, it's 45 days.
Right.
But yes.
And that would include anybody that's in a nursing home at disability? That would be that true? Okay.
So, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And so you've testified, and I found that to be I don't know whether that's what I expected or not, but the 32,000 voters that were counted after, that came in, I guess you say, after Election Day. So is that what you said, 32,000?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's actually a number that was from the Secretary of State's office during, again, the HB 2319 hearing, where they said that, again, these would be ballots that were postmarked. So they were mailed by voters on or before the close of polls on Election Day, and that on, as laid out there, it was about 17,000 arrived on Wednesday, 11,000 arrived on Thursday, and 4,000 arrived on Friday. So altogether, the voters that were essentially protected, or that their right to vote was protected by this 3-day grace period, was over 32,000 Kansas citizens in 2020.
So those that asked for advanced ballots would have had 20 days prior to the election and up to 3 days after the election. Is that correct? Would those ballots be counted?
Kind of. It would be, the county can't mail out the ballots until 20 days before. Now, that doesn't mean that 20 days before everyone will get their ballot. As we experienced in this last election, some counties hadn't finished processing even the mail ballot forms, that even though they were due many days before, there was such a huge backlog. And because there was just so many problems with the mail, voters who had applied 2 months in advance weren't receiving their mail ballot sometimes until, the day before the election or election day. Again, this comes down to, these are administered by every single county. So this would mean it's not that the voter gets it 20 days before, but at the earliest it can be mailed out. You add in a 7-day delay, and then you're at a point where maybe there's a couple-day window essentially already. If you go down to the 15-day that was proposed yesterday and passed out the committee, you might be looking at a situation where, given all this combined, voters in some rural districts might have a sweet spot where, like, they have 1 day where their ballot comes in and they need to get it out in the mail on the same day, and that might be the only way to vote by this, given all those time constraints.
So I think that what I'm looking at is election day by the person that walks into the polls is the election day. Election day for the person that does advanced balloting is election day plus 3 days. Is that correct?
Not really, because again, they have to vote. They have to have voted. Like, their vote has to be cast and has to be in the mail by before the close of the polls on election day. So this is a matter of kind of the administrative delivery of USPS. And a good kind of parallel to this would be to say, if you have to vote provisionally, like say you move down the street and your address changed and you have to vote provisionally, your vote isn't actually counted or processed until, maybe 15 days after the election. And I wouldn't say that that means that provisional voters get election day plus 15 days to vote, right? This is about the administrative government processes, because the goal is that the citizen has to have their vote in by election day. The failures and shortcomings of USPS or government procedures and administration, basically the bureaucracy aspect of this is what we're talking about, is if people will be disenfranchised by shortcomings of government bureaucracy or not.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ham, so just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, currently in Kansas, the act of casting a vote always has to happen by the close of Election Day, correct? Everything has to be, the casting of the vote under current law is always, has to be completed by the close of Election Day. What we're talking about is the back end of the process by which that cast vote, which again already had to happen by the close of Election Day, what we're talking about is the administrative governmental process through the USPS, through the operation of the county clerk's office or the election commissioner, by which that cast vote by Election Day ultimately becomes a counted ballot, correct?
Yes, that is 100% correct. Even when courts intervene, no court will intervene and say that, someone can go cast a new ballot. That hard deadline for every ballot is it has to be cast by 7 p.m. on Election Day.
And then my follow-up is, if we change this from 20 days to 15 days, if we accept the testimony that it can take a week from the mailing of a ballot to the voter, and then a week from the mailing of the ballot by the voter back to the election office, if we cut that down to 15 days, by my math, that would essentially give some voters literally one day. There would be one day where they would have to be home, they would have to complete their ballot, and they would have to drive it to a mailbox to get it back in the mail system, because 7 days on one end, 7 days on the back end would, by my math, leave literally one day for many of our voters in rural areas to make sure that they were home, immediately complete their ballot, and literally that same business day get it returned and back into the postal stream. Is that correct? Did I do that math correctly?
I believe that's correct. And that's assuming that there would be no circumstance where mail could take more than 7 days for any voter.
We do have, Katie, did you have a question, comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really not trying to be a nuisance. Katie Copal with the Secretary of State's office. I feel like for the purposes of this conversation, because it has been referred to an individual who's not representing our office, I did bring copies of our testimony that we submitted with 2319, so you're getting the information directly from us. It is a different bill, but on the backside it does have some data and I will hand this to Connie, and I'll also email it to her so you have a copy. One thing on the canvass statute says canvass may start 6 days following an election. So it was Tuesday. Counties could begin canvassing the Monday following the election, and that could go through the following Tuesday. So they had 8 days. And then from there, the state collects information, and then we canvass. In November, we canvassed at the end of November. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit. And then the deadline to request advance by mail ballot applications is 1 week prior to the election.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions for Mr. Hamlet, we thank you for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. We do have Mr. Mike Burgess with the Disability Rights Center with here. Welcome, Mike. Appreciate you being here.
Hi, thank you. And as the chair said, I'm Mike Burgess with the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. I'm the director in policy of policy and outreach there. I had also, since a lot of people covered their previous credentials, I had the privilege of chairing the House Elections Committee in 2007, 2008. Where I was happy to have championed a number of election security measures. I also got recruited to work by my county election officer at the time to be a supervising judge, and have worked both on an election board for a number of elections. So I have kind of firsthand experience on the polling site as well. And then for 6 years, I've been the director of policy outreach at the Disability Rights Center. And part of our mission is to educate, and we're charged by federal law, and one of our grants is to educate individuals with disabilities on their rights as voters, and to help them, in some cases, be able to vote. So most of that involves on election day doing monitoring of polling place accessibility. We also have a hotline that individuals can call if they have questions or concerns about their rights or about specific issues that could come up on election day. So I'll kind of jump in. I know you've covered a lot of ground, and so I appreciated this opportunity to come here today and talk about this, because I know during yesterday's 2-hour and 38-minute meeting, you covered a lot of ground, and I know there was some mention of individuals with disabilities, but want to just kind of give a little bit of context to that in light of this bill as well. So obviously you've covered the challenges of the U.S. Postal Service and the fact that all of the distribution centers or mail sorting centers are not in Kansas, and the delays. So many Kansans with disabilities do utilize advanced ballots. Now, one thing I do want to clarify is there are many individuals with disabilities who choose to vote on election day. I mean, that just like everyone else, that is their, so you can't just assume that the permanent advance list is all the people with disabilities. Certainly you have to have a disability to qualify for that, but there are numerous other individuals with disabilities that are not on that. So they may vote in person most years. This last year, more than likely, like a lot of Kansans, they chose to vote by mail this one election. So they don't want to be on the permanent list. So I think that's, you just need to have that in the back of your mind as you're looking at this. And it's always an individual's choice to disclose their disability in every circumstance. Voting is yet another choice where we have laws that allow certain privileges if you have a disability and they certify to that. But I want to make sure that that is always their choice and should always remain their choice of whether they choose to disclose their disability. So just to look at, again, kind of summarize in the context of this bill, which takes 3 days off the back, but yesterday you shortened the amount of time an individual has to advance vote by mail by 5 days. You limited who can assist a voter. And again, that's one of the things that's our contention. It always ought to be the individual's choice who assists them. Again, that ought to be their choice on who they ask for assistance. And obviously that person cannot, we would have very big issues for anyone who's exerting undue influence on a voter. But it always ought to be their choice who can assist them. That was removed. You added in a signature match requirement, which again, that is probably disproportionately going to impact individuals with disabilities and create an additional administrative barrier to make sure their vote casts. And then this bill removes 3 days on the back end for an individual with the mail. And so while I'll take myself personally, it's relatively easy for me to get my ballot, process it, sign it, put it in the envelope. Thankfully, I'm in Shawnee County where the county pays the postage. But if I wasn't in a county with paid postage, find a stamp, hopefully you have one, put the stamp on, and then put it in the mail. Again, that's quite a bit to do, but it's still very doable for me. Imagine if you're an individual with quadriplegia or dexterity challenges. This becomes a much bigger issue to go through that. Again, filling out the ballot, putting it in an envelope, filling out and signing all the necessary affidavits if somebody's assisting you. And again, if somebody with quadriplegia, someone's going to have to attest that they signed because the ADA and our Kansas law allows, their signature could be a wink in some circumstances. So if they give their signature, someone has to attest to that. All this has to happen, and if they're homebound, this has to happen when somebody's at their home to do all of this. Now with yesterday's, you limited it to 5 people. So if they're the 6th person, that their care attendant who's in that day, who's going to be, who's their regular attendant, helps them get out of bed, cooks their breakfast, helps them with their activities of daily living, like the Home and Community Services waivers provide for. That has to be, they have to catch them on that day. And again, with the mail service challenges, if they're in that 7-day, that all has to happen in that 1-day window. So I just, again, our concern, and I say this as somebody who has fought hard to have secure elections. I mean, there are a number of laws that I helped get passed to improve the security of elections. I think you have to balance with the accessibility. In this case, I mean, we know there's going to be individuals with disabilities in light of all of those things that are going to be negatively impacted, whose votes are not going to cast, or not going to count when cast. And so with that, that's why I want to urge your opposition to this bill and just give you context for all of those other changes. I mean, when you look at everything that you've done yesterday and possibly might do today, I mean, that's a big impact on those individuals with disabilities. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony, and thank you for being here. Can you just talk to me about, would the cumulative effect of these bills with the amendments, would the effect of those be collectively that it would be harder for people with disabilities to vote?
I think it's safe to say that would be the case, that there would be a lot less, there would be a significantly higher chance that there'd be voters with disabilities whose votes would not count for any one of those reasons.
Any other questions? Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Are there any others? Yes, Senator Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would oblige me, Secretary of State's office handed us testimony on HB 2319, and I had a question.
Thank you for being here again, Katie.
Katie, thank you.
Sure.
So was this your testimony that you provided and that you gave?
In this House Elections Committee, yes, sir.
Okay.
And it was on 23/19. Want to make sure I'm telling you the right bill.
Okay, we heard from a previous conferee that you had, that the Secretary of State's office had actually gave numbers for different dates, but I don't see those in here.
I believe they were offered verbally. I can give those verbally to you right now if you would like that information.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, yes. And that was part of our intent in giving you the testimony, so you had a copy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, do we have any, we had no neutrals, except we classified Katie as a neutral, so. And no other opponents. So if there's nothing else on this, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 307. We do have just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to open this back up. Yes, Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader, and thank you all for testifying. And one of the things I like about a committee is that you get to hear all certain types of views, and we all have different backgrounds. We all come from different ways. And I just came through a district convention in the western part of the state, and I had time, I met with over 150, but many people were really upset, concerned, wondering about what's our fundamental right for free people, our rights being challenged. They were concerned we ever be able to have a safe election. As I was watching things on TV, not Kansas so much, but other ones, as I was looking, all the challenges that were coming on. We can give example after example how it looked like other people were beating the system. And they were very frustrated that they were losing their fundamental right. And when we extended the voting days for 3 days, I wasn't here at that time, but it sounded like a pretty good idea. And it seemed like some people were taking advantage of that and extending the deadline. And really in some states, as we was watching, not in days, but weeks and months. I also understand the process that some of them never will be counted. And I also understand we went by law, so some people put them in afterwards, which is fine because they were obeying the laws. And I don't know, I just think that sometimes we're losing what we're trying to do also is have a fair, and everyone wants a fair election. We want everyone to be able to vote. And we have such a way of information that we give to the voters. I think every one of us got so sick and tired of being contacted for many ways. We have many groups that try to help us in there. So I think we did make a mistake a few years ago extending this. And I don't think there was really a problem that much in Kansas. And on that, so it kind of looks like a little bit of contradiction. But I also think that other states need to be stepping up, and maybe we can help clarify some of these where other people are taking advantage of it, of the situation that they have. And I also think some of the problems we have on here that other people mentioned, I think we can help take care of that. I think we can help fix those different ones. So I just want to come out and say that this is not an easy bill. And I really listened to the debates we went through and exchanging ideas, and that's what our whole government is about. And we look at it from different ways. And I just saw the pain in so many people in my district and the frustrations that they said, you know, it was very, they were very frustrated. So I plan on supporting this bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Ware.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As legislators and leaders, our highest goals should always be to protect rather than to diminish Kansans' rights. with all the bills that we passed out yesterday, along with this one today, it looks to me like we're doing the opposite when it comes to voting rights. I can't help but think about the single mom who's working 2, maybe even 3 jobs to take care of her family. She has real constraints on her time. Or the elderly who have constraints physically, or the poor who don't have a car, don't have a phone, don't maybe have the stamp like Oletha said the other day, or the disabled like we heard about today. Are we really ready to squash their voices? Our own Secretary of State said we were fine. Even Mike Pompeo was bragging about how well the Kansas election went just yesterday. So my main question is, what are we gaining while we are losing these rights? If there was a counterbalance, then there might be some, shining moment for me in this. And then there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are saying that these bills curtail their rights, and that's the aim of these bills. I really hope we can prove them wrong.
Senator Ware, that is not my intent. I take some exception to those comments, and I appreciate those are not your comments. It's what you've heard or what you've read. So thank you for that. I think our intent for this committee are fair, transparent, and secure elections. So my question when this bill came up, and I will say this, it came up quickly, came up from the House bill. My thought process when I read the bill was, when is an election over? And how much time should we give them? 3 days past it to accept it? Is that enough? We've heard testimony that it isn't for some, maybe, because of our slow mail service. But could we extend it to Thanksgiving? Could we extend it to Christmas? We have to have a date. Whether that date is November 3rd or whatever the Tuesday is, or whether it is 3 days past that or 20 days before that, we have an election day. And I think that we want to make sure that we communicate whatever decision we make here so that people know the changes and know that that is date. So those are my intentions with this bill, is to make sure, again, I'm going to repeat that so that I want to make sure we have a fair election. I want to have a transparent election, and I want to make sure we have a secure election. We've heard a lot of things, and again, Kansas was not a problem according to what the Secretary of State's office has said. We ran a very good ship. But that is not true for all the rest of the states. We do not want to open ourselves up to have those things come into Kansas. And that's what was attempted yesterday. I think that's what's attempted today. So with that, I'm going to work this bill, and I'm going to move that we approve Senate Bill 307, excuse me. My eyes didn't work well. So Senate Bill 307, and as we send it out to the Senate. Is there comments? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Senator Reichman brought up what I think is a good point, but I guess I would contend that I have a different solution, and that I think the reason that people are concerned about the integrity of our elections is not because there's been any problems, not because there's any evidence of that there are problems. It's that we have people who, for political advantage, are deliberately misinforming voters about the security of our elections. there have not been these problems that the chairman just referenced in quote, other states. That has just not been borne out by the facts. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I want to see evidence. There is no evidence. And so the fact that voters are being misinformed by people who are trying to take advantage of them for political reasons about the security of our elections, I would just say, bring me the facts, bring me the evidence, show me where this voter fraud is happening, show me where these unsecure elections are taking place, because I just haven't seen it, you know. And look, I don't, you know, claim to know what anybody's intent is, but I'm not worried about what anybody's intent is. I'm worried about what the effect of the law is. And what we've heard is that the effect of the law is that it would make it harder for people to vote. It would make it harder for disabled people to vote. It would make it harder for people who live in rural areas to vote. So at the end of the day, I think our intent is a little bit irrelevant. And I don't question anybody's intent, but what matters is the effect of this law. And the effect is that this law is point blank a voter suppression law. There is no other way to characterize it. This law, the only reason that we would pass this law is to make it harder for Kansans to vote. And, you know, you talked about, well, when is the end? I mean, that's, and again, a little bit of a red herring, because nobody is talking about elections going on until Thanksgiving. Nobody is talking about elections going on until Christmas. So I think to bring that up is a little bit of a distortion of the issue before this committee today, which is, do we maintain what is just a simple grace period to allow votes that, again, always have been cast on or before Election Day, current law? Do we allow some grace for the administrative, for the Postal Service, for the elections process, not the casting of the votes? So I guess I would just say it's a little bit of a red herring to be talking about extending an election through Thanksgiving. That's not the bill. Extending an election through Christmas is not the bill. Actually, the bill goes in the opposite direction, which is to restrict voting. And the effect of it, not the intent maybe, but the effect is that this is a voter suppression law that we're voting on. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, historically, Election Day has been the day that voting concludes, and sitting here listening to all the testimony on every side, everything has a timeline, and there are things in life that have a definite timeline. And it's been on my mind for some time that I have an expiration on my driver's license, and when I need to get in there and get it done. Many of us know the April 15th date. And so we have 364 days to plan for Election Day. And so I'm in support of this bill, this amendment.
Thank you. I made the motion to move this out of committee. Possibly, do we have a second? Motion's been made and seconded by Senator Hildebrand. Any further discussion? Yes, Senator Dietrich.
As well as a comment. I don't recall anybody saying what happened to this bill in the House, the 2319, I believe it was. Did it come out of committee, or did the House vote on it? I couldn't read my phone.
Okay, I will ask if the representative, what was the result of your bill in the House? Still in committee.
May I make a comment?
You may.
So, you know, I've been advocating for our elections offices. The last couple of days, we've taken a lot of actions to help, I think, have a more secure and transparent and safe election process with some of the other bills that we've passed out of committee. For me, I really have, my heart is with the disabled and the elderly. And, you know, I always talk about nursing homes because I've got 20 of them in the 20th Senate District. And I'm always concerned about making sure that we are able to allow them to cast their ballots. There's nothing more difficult than those senior citizens who feel that maybe they've been, you know, harmed in some way. And so one of the other things I always say, and I always maybe say it comically, but I really mean it, I try and do no harm when we're doing public policy. So this bill to me is probably just that one step too far. You know, we passed out a lot of bills that I think are going to help us be more secure and more transparent and more defined in our election process. So I just don't see the need for this bill, and I worry about what might happen to our disabled and our elderly in particular, or those folks who are living out in our rural areas who may not be able to get that ballot as much as they may have planned. Senator Cluse and Senator Reichman, I understand what you're saying. I just feel that I want to make sure that if we know that that ballot has been cast by the postmark on it, either on or before Election Day, then it deserves to be counted within that 3-day window that we currently have. Now, if it's after that it's received and it's not postmarked, you know, that's another issue. That's an administrative issue with the post office. So I'm not going to be in favor of this bill. I understand all of the feelings and the thoughts, but for me, I think we've done enough. And this is just that one piece that I worry about our disabled and our elderly. So for me, I'm going to be a no, but thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Aye. Raise your right hand. No. 5-3. Motion carries. I don't believe that there is anything else for today. Thank you for coming in on Friday, and thank you for the testimony that you've given today. So thank you very much. This hearing is over.